Okay, so we're continuing to talk about polygons, and we're going to talk about a particular type of polygon, which is quadrilaterals. Okay, so this lesson is called Identifying Quadrilaterals. So I kind of highlighted the core, kind of like quarter, right? So there's 4 quarters in a dollar. Quadrilaterals are 4-sided polygons or shapes. Okay, so a couple that you would know right off the top would be a rectangle and a square. Okay, trapezoid, parallelogram, and a rhombus. So these are all quadrilaterals. So let's explore what makes them different from each other. But first we kind of have to go over what parallel means. And parallel are lines. Let's put lines here. Lines. Let's go. Lines that always go in the same direction, same distance apart, and they never touch. So I've highlighted it here. So these red lines on this rectangle are parallel. They're the same distance apart, and if they continue in either direction, they will never ever touch. Okay, same with these blue lines. These blue lines are parallel. So we would say that this rectangle has 2 pairs, let me actually put that in there, of parallel lines. Okay, so this has 2 pairs, because if you think a pair, right, a pair of socks is 2. So 2 pairs of parallel lines, okay, the red and the blue. This shape, right, I always think of it as kind of like a triangle with the top cut off, has 1 set or 1 pair of parallel lines. Okay, only 1. Because if these 2 lines, right, they're not the same distance apart through the whole thing, right, they're starting to get closer and closer, and if they continued, they would touch and make a triangle, right? But the red lines are parallel. They're the same distance apart, and if they continued in that direction, they would never ever touch. Okay? If we look at this shape, right, the red lines, there's a pair. They will never touch. Those parallel lines. And these blue lines are parallel. Okay, continued in that direction, they would never touch. So this one also has 2 pairs of parallel lines. This has 1 pair of parallel lines. And this shape has only 1 pair of parallel lines. These blue lines, okay, given they would go up, continue, right, they would never touch. But if these continued, they would eventually touch. Okay, so parallel means lines that always go in the same distance apart and they never touch. Okay, so let's look what it looks like in the real world. Okay, so let's think of a football field. These lines are parallel. They kind of highlighted them for you, the maroon lines, right? Even those dotted lines are parallel that way. If you look at swimming lanes, these lines are parallel. Okay, railroad tracks, the big ones, those 2, that's 1 pair of parallel lines, right? If you look at it a different way, the slats that go in there, those are all parallel to each other. On the road, these 2 lines are parallel. Okay. These phone wires, parallel, same distance apart. Okay, never touching. Look at the bricks. They highlighted here. This line, the purple line, the green line, the yellow line, those are all parallel lines. Okay. These fence, right? So this big one is parallel to that. Then these little ones are all parallel to each other. So there's parallel lines everywhere. You know, you gotta look around your house. I could probably send you on a scavenger hunt and look for parallel lines. Ceiling tiles, these are parallel, right? The bridge, these lines are parallel. These big, that's parallel to that, right? Drawbridge. So in nature, in the world, parallel lines are everywhere. but they are an important part of some of the definitions that we're about to talk about. For instance, a parallelogram. Okay, it's a flat shape that has four sides where opposite sides are parallel. Okay, so I gave you some examples of what would be a parallelogram. This is a parallelogram. So this and this, these two lines, they're opposite, they are parallel. These are opposite, they're parallel. Okay, if you look at this diamond, right? The red lines, parallel. The blue lines, parallel. Now, if we were in class, I would have you use crayons or highlighters or markers when we did worksheets to highlight so you could see. So, on a computer, it won't be, as easy, but you might want to, use the cursor and just see, okay, yes, those are parallel. Same here with this rectangle. So a rectangle is a parallelogram. Okay, opposite, parallel, opposite, parallel, opposite, parallel, opposite, parallel. That's a square. The lines just went over a little bit. All right, and then a parallelogram, the ones that they call total parallelogram. Well, these are all parallelograms, but you'll see a lot that look like this. They're kind of like slanty a little bit. Okay, because what's different between a rectangle is a parallelogram, but a parallelogram doesn't have to have the right angles like a rectangle and a square. Okay, so notice these, right? This doesn't have right angles. They're a little bit, tilted. So, but they're opposite sides of parallel. So that's a parallelogram. Same with this. Okay. Then you have a rectangle. Four-sided shape, right? We've talked about this. Opposite sides are parallel and equal length. So I just gave you a whole bunch of examples of what a rectangle looks like. But that's pretty basic. That's not, I think, a shape that you're going to struggle with. But they can be thin, they can be wide, they can be tilted in any direction, right? They just have to have four sides. The opposite sides have to be the same length, which we've been kind of talking about all week. They do have parallel lines, but that, right? All right, so I don't think a rectangle is going to be a difficult one. A trapezoid, okay? Now, it's a quadrilateral, so there's that word again, which just means a four-sided polygon, four-sided shape, okay? Has only one pair of parallel sides. So the most common one that you're going to see, and that you're probably very familiar with, is this one, okay? And I like to call it, the cutoff, triangle with the cutoff top, right? Because if it went up. So that one, we have our blocks at school and our pattern blocks. This is the trapezoid, right? But notice, right, it has to have one pair of parallel lines. So here's my one set of parallel lines. These two are not parallel because they will end up touching, right? But look how else they can look. See, because this, let's look at this pink one, right? This line right here, this tiny line, is parallel to that line above it. That's one pair. But these two sides are not. So it has four sides, right? But one set of parallel lines. So I think this is the one that the kids struggle with the most, because it could look like this, right? So if we look to the pointer, this line is parallel to this line, okay? But these two are not parallel. They will touch, right? They'll make that triangle. So this is parallel. This is not, so it has one set of parallel lines. This is this, but just more. And it should look like that. They can turn it, right? But again, this is parallel to that. These are not. They can flip it upside down, more like this, right? So these two are not parallel. This is parallel. So let's see if we, now you can make it thinner, but again, sometimes they might turn it like this, okay? So it can look a whole bunch of different ways. But what you're saying to yourself is, okay, how many pairs of parallel lines does it have? Will this one touch this one? Yeah, it would, if it continues out this way. Would this one touch this one? No. Okay, so it has one pair. So it's a trapezoid. All right. A rhombus. So a rhombus is a flat shape, right? With four sides that have equal length. Also, the opposite sides are parallel. Okay. So all sides are equal length. So that's the difference. So see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are all the same size, right? Now, what's the difference between, let me just do this a little bit here and there. It says opposite angles are equal. So that's how it's different than a square. Okay, a square has to have four right angles, but the angles, see, these are large angles, these two, and these two are skinny angles. Okay, skinny angles, large angles, but the sides are the same size. Okay, that's what makes it different. Okay, a square would have four sides that are the same length, but all angles would be equal. Okay, and the last one is a square. Okay, all sides are the same size. In this red box or the square kind of thing, see, that's where your L is. That's your right angle. And it says 90 degrees because that is a right angle. Again, we don't have a protractor, but if we had a protractor, it's kind of like a ruler, but it specifically measures angles. And it would say 90 degrees. Okay, that would be the measurement. So angles are measured in degrees. And a right angle is 90 degrees. And sometimes it'll show with this little square, which to me looks like little baseball bases. But if it has this on a shape, you know that they mean that it's a right angle. Okay. So that's our quadrilaterals: a rectangle, a trapezoid, a parallelogram, a rhombus, and a square. Okay. A rhombus and a square look pretty similar, right? Except the rhombus doesn't have to have four right angles. The opposite angles are the same. Okay. And actually, if I were to say, right, this has two, in a different color, a little bit. This, a rectangle, has two pairs of parallel lines. Okay, two pairs, right? A trapezoid, what makes it different than all of these? The trapezoid is the one that has only one pair. Parallelogram has two pairs. Rhombus has two pairs. The opposite sides, two pairs. and so does the square. I'm just going to copy and paste. It'll be easier. Yeah. Okay. So, again, remember I told you that you want to, when you're learning new things, you want to look for similarities. You want to look for differences. So when we're looking at, okay, we have quadrilaterals, right? So we have 5 quadrilaterals that we have to know: rectangle, trapezoid, parallelogram, rhombus, and square. All right, the trapezoid is the only one that's different. The trapezoid, well, different in the fact that it only has one pair of parallel lines. Okay, so if you come across a shape that has one pair, has 4 sides, all of these have 4 sides. Okay, so if you come across a 4-sided shape that has only one pair of parallel lines, it's got to be a trapezoid. Okay, so then we say, okay, a rectangle and square, we're pretty familiar with a rectangle and a square, right? Square has to have all the same equal length. Rectangle, they're not all the equal length, right? Opposite sides are equal length. Okay, so then again, all right, rhombus and square, they're similar because all of their sides have equal length, right? But what makes it different? What makes a rhombus not a square, right? Remember, the square has 4 right angles. The rhombus has 2 baby angles and 2 big angles, right? And they're opposite of each other. And then the parallelogram has 2 sets of parallel lines. Okay. So we will explore that a little bit more. What are parallelograms? Are rectangles? Are trapezoids? Rhombus? And square. Okay, so we will talk a little bit more.